As this new morning breaks over Monday, December 15th, 2025, I stand in the presence of the one who holds time, seasons, and destinies in his hands. Before the day stretches its hours before me, I choose to step into its unfolding with intention, with clarity, and with spiritual authority. I align my heart with heaven's rhythm, knowing that nothing I face today is greater than the God who goes before me. This moment is not casual. It is a divine appointment, a sacred opportunity to command the day so that every thought, every assignment, and every challenge bows to the purposes of God. I come before him to speak into the unseen, to shift the atmosphere, and to anchor my steps in his presence. Today will not simply happen to me. I will move through it covered, empowered, and directed by prayer. Establishing spiritual authority at the start of the day is not merely a practice. It is a posture of the soul, a deliberate choice to step forward with the awareness that the day ahead must be aligned, shaped, and governed by the one who has already declared your victory. When you rise each morning, you stand at the threshold of time, facing hours that have yet to be written, conversations that have yet to unfold, and battles that have yet to show themselves. And in that moment, before the world begins to impose its demands, your spirit has the opportunity to take its rightful place. Rooted in God, anchored in his word, and positioned to influence rather than be influenced. It is the quiet moment before the noise, the stillness before the movement, the breath before the speaking. In that place, authority is recognized, embraced, and activated. It is where you declare, not in arrogance, but in spiritual understanding, that your day will not be left to chance or circumstance, because you serve a God who invites you to partner with him in ordering your steps and framing your path. When you intentionally choose to establish spiritual authority, you acknowledge that though the day may carry unknowns, you are not entering it unprepared. You are stepping in with heaven's backing, heaven's wisdom, and heaven's strength. You lift your spirit above the temporary pressures that may try to set the tone before you even begin. You stretch your faith beyond what you see and anchor it in what God has already spoken. You remind yourself that authority is not noise, it is alignment. It is the quiet assurance that when God has given you dominion, you are not meant to move through life passively, waiting to react to whatever comes. You move with intention, you move with clarity, you move with spiritual consciousness, that the atmosphere around you responds not only to what you say, but to who you are in God. When your identity is rooted in him, authority is not something you try to muster. It becomes the natural expression of your relationship with the one who called you, equipped you, and entrusted you with purpose. As the morning begins, establishing spiritual authority means taking the time to silence the internal noise before external noise arrives. It is allowing your spirit to rise above yesterday's residue, today's concerns, and tomorrow's possibilities. It is giving your heart permission to breathe deeply in the presence of God, to settle into his truth, and to release anything that threatens to distract you from the fullness of his plan. It is standing in the awareness that your thoughts carry weight, your words carry influence, and your posture carries power. You refuse to step into the day fragmented or scattered because authority requires alignment. When your mind is aligned with his word, your emotions aligned with his peace, and your will aligned with his direction, you become a vessel that moves with steadiness rather than tension. You approach the day not as one who is overwhelmed, but as one who is supported by divine wisdom that prepares you for every situation. Spiritual authority at the start of the day means recognizing the power of your voice. It is understanding that when you speak God's truth, you are not simply reciting religious phrases. You are calling heaven's order into the unfolding hours. You are declaring that the assignments God has entrusted to you will not be obstructed, delayed, or diminished by forces that oppose his will. You are declaring that your steps are ordered, your mind is sound, your spirit is strengthened, and your purpose is protected. You speak with clarity because you know that your words are not floating aimlessly. They are taking shape in realms you cannot see. They are establishing boundaries, opening paths, and dismantling hindrances. They are aligning your life with promises that God has already spoken. And as you speak, your spirit becomes attuned to his presence, and the day becomes receptive to his influence. There is a sacredness in recognizing that authority is not about control, it is about surrender. It is surrendering your agenda to God's wisdom, your plans to his guidance, and your expectations to his sovereignty. It is saying before the day unfolds that you trust his hand more than your own understanding. You acknowledge that he sees what you do not see, knows what you do not know, and prepares what you cannot predict. Establishing authority in the morning is not about declaring what you demand, but aligning with what he desires. It is stepping into the rhythm of heaven so that your pace, decisions, attitude, and perspective reflect the stability of one who walks with God. When you surrender to him at the start of the day, your authority becomes purified, refined, and directed by his spirit, allowing you to walk in confidence without becoming dependent on your own strength. As you begin the day, establishing spiritual authority also means positioning your heart to receive. It is opening yourself to divine instruction, divine correction, and divine inspiration. It is giving God room to speak into the spaces where you feel uncertain, weary, or stretched. It is allowing him to fill the places where your strength is insufficient and your clarity is limited. When you start your morning in his presence, you give his voice priority over every competing voice that will try to shape your day. You tune your spirit to the frequency of his guidance so that even in moments of pressure, your internal compass remains steady and aligned. You remind yourself that authority is not simply the ability to speak. It is the capacity to listen. Listening to God recalibrates your steps and prepares your spirit to discern opportunities, avoid pitfalls, and recognize divine moments hidden within ordinary tasks. There is a shift that occurs when you take authority before the day begins. You move from being reactive to being proactive. You enter the day as one who is spiritually awake, mentally clear, and emotionally grounded. You become aware of patterns the enemy may attempt to use, and you resist them with spiritual awareness instead of emotional response. You see challenges not as threats, but as opportunities for God to demonstrate his strength. You see people not as obstacles, but as individuals God may use or shape through your presence. You see tasks not as burdens, but as assignments tied to purpose. When authority leads the day, your perspective changes. And when your perspective changes, everything connected to your day flows differently. You carry a sense of expectation, a sense of assurance, and a sense of peace that becomes a shield against discouragement and distraction. Establishing spiritual authority also means embracing the truth that the God who began your day with breath will sustain you through every hour. It is reminding yourself that you are not alone, not abandoned, and not unsupported. Heaven is active. Angels are assigned. Grace is abundant. Strength is available. Wisdom is present. You walk with a divine escort that surrounds you, covers you, and equips you. When you acknowledge this reality at the start of the day, your spirit stands tall, even before circumstances demand it. You move through challenges with composure. You speak with clarity, even when situations are uncertain. You carry peace into environments that lack direction. The authority you establish in the morning becomes the atmosphere you bring into every space, allowing God's presence to flow through you in subtle and powerful ways. As you continue through the early hours, authority manifests in your choices. It shows up in the way you respond instead of react, the way you think instead of worry, the way you move instead of hesitate. It shows up in the way you guard your peace, protect your focus, and honor your boundaries. Authority does not shout, it stands. It does not force, it aligns. It does not panic, it trusts. When you begin your day connected to God, your decisions emerge from clarity rather than confusion. You become mindful of what you allow into your spirit, aware of where you invest your energy, and intentional about what you give your attention to. Authority empowers you to say yes to what builds you and no to what drains you. Yes to what aligns with your calling and no to what dilutes your purpose. And when you consistently practice this at the start of each day, your spirit develops a strength that is not easily shaken. The more you establish authority in the morning, the more your life becomes a reflection of divine order. You begin to notice that what once overwhelmed you no longer holds the same weight. What once intimidated you no longer determines your posture. What once confused you no longer clouds your judgment. Authority creates stability, and stability creates momentum. As your mornings become aligned, your days follow. And as your days follow, your seasons shift. You start to walk with a confidence that is not rooted in personality, but in presence. The presence of God that surrounds you, fills you, and leads you. You carry an inner stillness that does not crumble under pressure because it is built on the foundation of communion with God. Each morning becomes a fresh opportunity to reinforce that foundation, to strengthen your inner life, and to remind your spirit who you belong to and who you represent. In establishing spiritual authority, you also cultivate a sensitivity to the movements of God throughout the day. You become aware of his nudges, quiet in his corrections, receptive to his whispers. The alignment you set in the morning gives you the ability to discern when to move, when to pause, when to speak, and when to remain silent. Your discernment sharpens because your spirit remains tuned. Your peace deepens because your spirit remains anchored. Your strength expands because your spirit remains connected. And with each passing day, this practice becomes less of a discipline and more of a natural expression of relationship. It becomes your default posture to begin with God, to align with God, and to step into your day under the covering of his authority flowing through you. Declaring God's promises at the start of the day is an act of intentional faith, a spiritual alignment that pulls your heart back into the truth of what God has spoken over your life. When you wake up and choose to speak his word, you are not simply reciting verses. You are activating a spiritual reality that supersedes everything that may try to unfold in the natural world. You are taking your stand in a place where his truth becomes your atmosphere, your shield, your grounding. Before fear has a chance to whisper, before doubt can form its questions, before the demands of the day rise to meet you, you anchor yourself in declarations that remind your spirit who God is, what he has said, and what he has already settled. Declaring his promises is how you calm the internal noise and silence the external pressures, not by escaping them, but by placing truth at the center of your being so that everything else is measured against what God has spoken. There is a power that moves through your spirit when you declare God's promises with intention. It is not emotional hype. It is spiritual positioning. It is choosing to speak from a place of covenant rather than circumstance. It is recognizing that God's word is not fragile or inconsistent, but enduring, unchanging, and steadfast. When you speak his promises, you are aligning yourself with his nature, his faithfulness, his goodness, his strength, his wisdom. His word becomes the light that goes ahead of you, the shield that surrounds you, and the anchor that steadies you. And as you declare what he has said, your heart begins to shift, your mind begins to settle, and your spirit begins to rise above the weight of the day. You find yourself standing in a place where fear cannot dominate, confusion cannot settle, and spiritual resistance cannot root itself, because the atmosphere of your inner world has been filled with truth. Declaring God's promises is also an act of reclaiming authority over your thoughts. Every day, your mind becomes the battleground of possibilities, some rooted in faith, others rooted in fear. And if you do not speak God's word, fear will begin to narrate your day before God's voice has a chance to speak. But when you begin your morning by declaring his promises, you place a guard over your mind, you filter your thoughts through truth, and you establish an internal environment where peace becomes possible. You remind yourself that God has not given you a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. You bring your thoughts into alignment with His truth, not by force, but by reminding them of what God has already spoken. With each declaration, you interrupt the patterns that would otherwise drain your strength, and you elevate the thoughts that carry life, direction, and clarity. When you speak God's promises, you are also engaging the spiritual realm in a way that transforms what you cannot see yet. Words are not empty. They are carriers of intention, faith, and authority. The promises you declare are not passive statements. They are proclamations that shape the direction of your day. When you speak healing, you create room for restoration. When you speak peace, you quiet spiritual turbulence. When you speak clarity, confusion begins to unravel. When you speak provision, you align yourself with the God who supplies. The spiritual realm responds to the word of God, not because of human effort, but because His word cannot return void. When you declare His promises, you are releasing the very breath of God into the day, allowing His truth to travel ahead of you, cover you, and prepare the path you are about to walk. There is also a settling that happens inside you when you declare God's promises. The heart has a way of absorbing the burdens of yesterday and the worries of tomorrow. But when you speak His truth, you remind your heart that it is held by a faithful God. You remind yourself that His promises did not expire overnight. You remind your soul that what He spoke over your life still stands, untouched by circumstances, unchanged by challenge. The more you declare His word, the more your heart becomes steady. You begin to feel the weight of worry loosen. You sense the grip of anxiety weaken. You feel the tension within you begin to dissolve. And it is not because the circumstances around you have changed. It is because your heart has come into agreement with truth rather than fear. Declaring God's promises also strengthens your ability to resist spiritual opposition. Throughout the day, you may encounter thoughts that contradict God's truth, voices that discourage you, challenges that try to derail your faith. But when you begin your day with declarations, you prepare your spirit for resistance. You sharpen your awareness. You strengthen your posture. You become less vulnerable to lies and more rooted in truth. God's promises become your defense, your shield. You're reminded that you are not battling from weakness, but from strength. His word becomes the sword you carry, not to fight with noise, but to stand with confidence. When you know His promises, you recognize the lies that attempt to rise against them. And when you speak His word aloud, you reinforce your authority and silence every thought that tries to contradict what God has spoken. Declaring His promises also shifts the way you see your challenges. Instead of viewing them through the lens of your limitations, you see them through the lens of God's sovereignty. You remember that He is able to turn difficulties into breakthroughs, obstacles into testimonies, and delays into divine timing. You remember that nothing you face is greater than the God who stands with you. So rather than shrinking under pressure, you rise with faith. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, you feel supported. Instead of feeling alone, you feel covered. His promises shape your perspective. And when your perspective is rooted in truth, challenges become opportunities for God's power to be revealed in ways you could not imagine. As you declare His promises, something begins to shift in the atmosphere around you. Peace becomes more accessible, strength becomes more tangible, clarity becomes more defined. The very tone of your day begins to reflect the truth you have spoken. You carry a sense of expectation, a quiet confidence that God is present, working, guiding, and protecting. You begin to notice doors opening, burdens lifting, and solutions forming, not because the day is easier, but because your spirit is aligned. You move through situations with a calmness that does not match the difficulty. You speak with a clarity that does not match the pressure. You respond with wisdom that does not match the complexity. Your inner world becomes steady because God's promises have become the foundation upon which your day is built. Declaring God's promises also prepares your heart to love well throughout the day. When your spirit is grounded in truth, you become more patient with others, more gracious in conversation, more compassionate in moments of tension. You carry an inner gentleness that flows from knowing you are cared for by God. When His promises rest on your heart, you do not carry your fears into your interactions. You do not burden others with your anxieties. You show up with peace. And that peace becomes a gift to those around you. You become someone who spreads calm instead of stress, someone who speaks life instead of negativity, someone who carries light instead of heaviness. God's promises transform not only your relationship with Him, but your relationship with others. Declaring His promises also helps you walk in patience throughout the day. There will be things you are waiting for, answers that have not yet come, breakthroughs that seem far away. But when you speak God's word, you remind yourself that waiting does not mean abandonment. Delay does not mean denial. Silence does not mean distance. His promises anchor you in seasons where your natural sight cannot see movement. They keep you from becoming discouraged, restless, or frustrated. They help you trust God's timing even when it feels slow. And as you declare His word, your heart gains the strength to wait with expectation rather than fear, to trust with peace rather than anxiety, to continue with faith rather than doubt. There is something deeply comforting about beginning your day with God's promises. It is like placing your hand in His before taking a single step. It is choosing to walk with assurance rather than uncertainty. It is deciding that you will not allow the day to define your spirit. Instead, your spirit will define how you walk through the day. Declaring His promises is how you remind yourself that you are not navigating life alone. God is with you. His presence surrounds you. His wisdom leads you. His love sustains you. And when you speak His word, that awareness becomes tangible. It becomes real. It becomes alive within you. As you continue to declare His promises, they begin to shape your identity. You no longer see yourself through the lens of past failures, current insecurities, or external opinions. You begin to see yourself through the lens of God's truth. You remember that you are chosen, called, strengthened, and equipped. You carry yourself with quiet dignity, not because of who you are in the natural, but because of who you are in Him. His promises become the mirror through which you see your worth, your purpose, and your potential. And when your identity is rooted in Him, you move through the day with confidence that cannot be easily shaken. Declaring God's promises also creates movement within you. It stirs your faith, it awakens your hope, it energizes your purpose. It reminds you that God is not done with you, that every day carries new opportunities for His hand to be revealed in your life. When you speak His word, you give your spirit permission to believe again, to expect again, to hope again. You lift your eyes above what is in front of you and fix them on what God is capable of doing. His promises breathe life into your spirit. And that life becomes the strength you carry into the tasks, decisions, and interactions of the day. And as you continue speaking His promises day after day, you build a spiritual rhythm that becomes unbreakable. Your faith deepens, your awareness sharpens, your confidence strengthens. You create a spiritual foundation that cannot be easily disrupted, no matter how the day unfolds. His promises become your morning light, your guiding truth, your unwavering center, shaping your heart and preparing your spirit for everything that awaits you. Positioning your mind and spirit to hear divine instruction before engaging the world is one of the most powerful choices you can make at the beginning of your day. There is a stillness required, a quieting of the soul that allows you to turn your inner ear toward God's voice before the noise of life attempts to claim your attention. In the early moments of the morning, when your mind is not yet crowded and your emotions have not been stirred by circumstances, there is an open space within you where God can speak with clarity. It is in that space that direction forms, peace settles, and perspective becomes anchored. When you intentionally position yourself to hear him first, you are acknowledging that his wisdom is greater than your plans, his insight deeper than your understanding, and his guidance more reliable than human reasoning. You are choosing to establish a rhythm of listening before acting, receiving before responding, and aligning before advancing. The world often pushes you into motion before your spirit is ready, but God invites you into stillness before your steps are taken. He invites you to pause long enough to recognize the movements of his spirit, the impressions he places on your heart, and the quiet instructions that shape the course of your day. When you allow him to speak first, you enter the day with a sense of clarity that cannot be manufactured through effort or discipline alone. You move with a steadiness that comes from being spiritually oriented, aware of his presence, conscious of his leading, and grounded in his truth. This is not about escaping responsibilities or delaying the demands of life. It is about beginning from a place of alignment so that your actions are guided by divine wisdom instead of emotional impulse. There is a sacred discipline to quieting your inner world long enough for God's voice to rise above your thoughts. The mind naturally gravitates toward concerns, to-do lists, and unresolved issues. But when you intentionally turn your focus toward God, your mind begins to settle. Thoughts that once felt urgent lose their intensity. Worries that threaten to crowd your spirit begin to loosen their grip. Your emotions become steady, your perspective widens, and your heartbeat aligns with a rhythm of peace. This posture of quietness is not passive, it is powerful. It is the space where clarity is born, where insight grows, and where God deposits wisdom that will shape every conversation, decision, and encounter that follows. Positioning your mind and spirit to hear God is also an act of humility. It is the recognition that you do not see everything, know everything, or understand everything. It is acknowledging that no matter how experienced, capable, or prepared you may feel, you still need the one who sees the full picture. When you humble yourself before God in the morning, you are choosing dependence over self-reliance. You are choosing to be guided rather than driven, led rather than pushed, aligned rather than scattered. This humility becomes a place of strength, because when God's wisdom informs your steps, you walk with a confidence that does not collapse under pressure. You make decisions with clarity instead of confusion. You move with purpose instead of hesitation. There is also a deep peace that rests on the soul when you are positioned to hear divine instruction. Peace is not simply the absence of trouble, it is the presence of God's guidance. It is knowing that your steps are not random, your choices are not disconnected, and your day is not unfolding in chaos. When God directs your inner world, turmoil loses its power. The peace he gives becomes a shield around your thoughts, protecting you from anxiety, fear, and mental exhaustion. You begin to move with a calm assurance that even if unexpected challenges arise, you are not navigating them alone. God has already prepared your spirit to respond with wisdom rather than reaction. He has given you insight before the need arises, strength before the pressure approaches, and discernment before decisions demand to be made. Positioning your mind and spirit to hear God also sharpens your discernment. Discernment is not suspicion, nor is it the product of overthinking. It is the ability to sense God's leading in subtle ways, to recognize what is right even when it is not obvious, and to identify what is wrong even when it is appealing. It is the quiet radar of the spirit that alerts you to conversations you should avoid, opportunities you should embrace, and situations you should step away from. When your spirit is positioned to hear God, you recognize his nudges more easily. You sense when he is drawing your attention to something. You feel the gentle tug on your conscience when something is not aligned with his will. You become aware of his direction not only in significant decisions, but also in the small, unnoticed moments. that shape the rhythm of your day. There is a depth of clarity that comes from beginning your day in alignment with God's voice. When your mind is clear and your spirit is settled, you are able to see beyond the surface of things. You become sensitive to the opportunities God places in front of you, the assignments He wants you to fulfill, and the divine appointments woven into the simplicity of everyday life. What once seemed ordinary becomes meaningful. What once felt mundane becomes purposeful. You begin to recognize that every moment carries potential when your spirit is in tune with God's leading. You move through the day with a sense of expectation, not driven by urgency, but guided by purpose. Positioning yourself to hear divine instruction also strengthens your resistance to distraction. The world pulls at your attention from every direction, attempting to scatter your focus and drain your energy. But when your mind is anchored in God's voice, distractions lose their power to derail you. You become intentional about where you invest your attention. You gain the ability to distinguish between what is urgent and what is important, between what is temporary and what is eternal, between what is noise and what is meaningful. Your mind becomes guarded not by rigidity, but by spiritual awareness. You are no longer pulled into conversations that drain your peace, tasks that stretch you thin, or situations that pull you away from your purpose. God's voice becomes the compass that keeps you centered. As you position your spirit to hear God, you also develop a deeper awareness of His presence throughout the day. His voice does not always speak in dramatic ways. Often it comes through gentle impressions, quiet thoughts, or moments of inner knowing. When your spirit begins the day in alignment, you remain sensitive to those subtle movements. You sense His comfort when you feel stretched. You feel His strength when you experience weakness. You sense His correction when your heart begins to drift. You recognize His encouragement in moments where discouragement tries to settle. This sensitivity creates a living connection with God that carries you through every moment, decision, and encounter. Positioning your mind and spirit to hear God also brings order to areas of your life that once felt chaotic. When God speaks, He brings direction. He brings wisdom. He brings alignment. His instruction may not always come with explanations, but it always carries purpose. When you begin your day with His direction, you avoid pitfalls that could have consumed your time, peace, or energy. You step with confidence because you know you are not moving blindly. You walk with boldness because your steps are informed by divine wisdom. You make decisions with clarity because your perspective is grounded in truth rather than emotion. This posture also cultivates emotional stability. When God anchors your inner world, your emotions no longer dictate your direction. You do not react impulsively to pressure, conflict, or uncertainty. You remain steady even when circumstances fluctuate. You respond with grace instead of frustration, patience instead of irritation, wisdom instead of haste. Emotional stability is not the absence of feeling. It is the ability to manage your feelings from a place of spiritual grounding. When God's voice is the foundation of your day, your emotions rise and fall without pulling you out of alignment. Positioning yourself to hear God also strengthens your faith. When you listen to His voice, you become aware of His movement in your life. You begin to see how He prepares you, guides you, and speaks into your spirit in ways that shape your decisions and protect your path. The more you recognize His voice, the more your trust in Him deepens. You realize that He is not distant or silent. He is present, attentive, and actively involved in guiding your steps. This awareness builds a confidence that cannot be shaken by circumstances, delays, or challenges. There is a beauty in allowing God's instruction to reach you before the world does. It creates a sanctuary within your spirit where His voice becomes the anchor of your day. You begin to walk with a sense of purpose, confidence, and peace that does not come from external conditions, but from internal alignment. You move through the day as one who is guided rather than lost. centered rather than scattered, steady rather than overwhelmed. This alignment strengthens your character, sharpens your discernment, deepens your faith, and enriches your relationship with God. As you consistently position your mind and spirit to hear divine instruction each morning, your inner life becomes a place where God can speak freely, where his guidance is welcome, and where his wisdom is treasured. You develop a rhythm of listening that carries into every area of your life. You begin to notice his voice more clearly, respond to his leading more quickly, and depend on his direction more fully. Your days become more peaceful, your decisions more grounded, in your spirit more attuned to the movement of God within you. And from that place of alignment, you move through the world with a quiet strength, carrying his presence into every space you enter. Cultivating a mindset of expectancy to receive God's provision and direction is a spiritual posture that transforms the way you move through your day. It shifts you from living as though you are navigating life alone to carrying the awareness that heaven is actively involved in every detail concerning you. Expectancy is not wishful thinking. It is the quiet but unshakable knowing that God is already working, already moving, already orchestrating what you have not yet seen. It is a heart position that refuses to assume lack, limitation, or denial. Instead, it assumes that God is present, God is speaking, God is guiding, and God is preparing what aligns with his will for your life. When you rise in the morning with expectancy, you do not wait for circumstances to confirm God's presence. You begin the day acknowledging that he is already ahead of you, preparing the path, opening the right doors, closing the wrong ones, and placing divine opportunities within reach. This mindset becomes a spiritual lens that helps you interpret life not through fear or uncertainty, but through the assurance that God is involved in the unseen places long before anything manifests. Expectancy trains your spirit to listen differently. You begin to hear God in moments you once would have overlooked. You sense his nudges in quiet thoughts, subtle movements in your heart, gentle redirections you may not have noticed if your mind were clouded with doubt. When you expect God to guide you, you become more aware of the small ways he leads you throughout the day. You notice how a single scripture rises in your spirit at the exact moment you need it. You recognize divine timing when you cross paths with someone unexpectedly who becomes an answer to a prayer you haven't even spoken aloud. You stop dismissing these moments as coincidences because expectancy teaches you to interpret life as something God is actively shaping. It opens your eyes to provision that doesn't always arrive in dramatic ways, but often through simple, quiet, consistent evidence of his care. You learn to trust that God does not need noise or spectacle to make his presence known. He often speaks in stillness, in subtlety, and in the delicate weaving of everyday moments that hold more divine intention than you realize. When you cultivate expectancy, you give God room to move freely without dictating how he should show up. Expectancy is not presumption. It does not demand a particular outcome or timeline. Instead, it keeps your spirit open, flexible, and willing to receive in whatever form God chooses to provide. It removes the rigidity that comes from fear-driven thinking and replaces it with a surrendered confidence that God's way is better, wiser, and more aligned with the fullness of his purpose for your life. You begin to trust that even when his answers look different from what you hoped for, they are still good, still purposeful, still infused with love. This mindset strengthens you with patience because you understand that delays are not denials. They are often divine rearrangements. Moments when God is preparing what requires more time, more alignment, or more maturity than you anticipated. Expectancy keeps you anchored so you don't crumble under the weight of waiting. Instead, you wait with hope, believing that what God has spoken is making its way into your life with precision and intentionality. A mindset of expectancy also reshapes the way you pray. You no longer pray as someone trying to convince God to act. You pray from the assurance that God is already acting, already listening, already responding in ways you may not yet see. Your prayers shift from desperation to alignment, from anxiety to trust. You speak not from fear of what might happen, but from confidence in who God is. This kind of expectancy strengthens your faith because you begin to pray with clarity, authority, and alignment. You stop rehearsing your worries before God and begin declaring your trust in Him. You begin to thank Him in advance for what He is preparing, even when the evidence has not yet materialized. Your spirit grows stronger because expectancy teaches you to stand firm in what God has promised instead of collapsing under what life is presenting. Prayer becomes a place of communion rather than panic, and your heart remains steady because you know that God is faithful to fulfill what He has spoken. Expectancy also operates as a spiritual magnet for clarity. When your mind is anchored in trust rather than overwhelmed by fear, you can perceive God's guidance more clearly. Anxiety distorts perception, but expectancy calms the inner atmosphere so revelation can rise without interference. God is always speaking, but expectancy positions you to hear Him without the static of fear, doubt, or exhaustion. You begin recognizing patterns in the way He leads you, the way He speaks to your heart, the way He confirms things through scripture, through peace, through discernment, through the gentle pulling or releasing you sense in your spirit. You become more sensitive to what nurtures your peace and more aware of what disrupts it. You learn to follow the flow of God's leading, trusting that peace is not merely a feeling, but a signal that aligns you with His will. Expectancy sharpens your spiritual hearing because you begin the day believing that God will guide you, and that belief opens the pathway for His direction to reach you without confusion. As expectancy deepens, it influences your emotional stability. You stop waking up bracing for what could go wrong and begin waking up looking for what God is doing. You no longer carry the weight of trying to control every detail because expectancy lifts that burden off your shoulders. It strengthens your confidence because you trust that God is not only capable, but willing to provide what you need. Fear loses its grip because your mind is no longer dominated by worst case scenarios. Instead, it is grounded in the truth that God is working all things together for your good. You begin to carry yourself with a quiet strength, a steadiness that doesn't rely on everything going right, but on the unwavering belief that God is with you in everything. This mindset protects your joy because your joy is rooted in God's faithfulness, not in the unpredictability of circumstance. Expectancy becomes the guard over your heart, keeping hope alive, even when challenges arise. Cultivating expectancy requires discipline, but it is the kind of discipline that transforms your inner world. It means choosing day after day to believe that God is good, that His plans are intentional, that His timing is perfect, and that His provision is already on the way. It means rehearsing truth more than fear, choosing gratitude over frustration, and deciding to interpret life through the lens of faith rather than uncertainty. It means reminding yourself that God has never abandoned you, never failed you, never overlooked you, and never stopped working for your good. Expectancy grows each time you choose to trust Him in the face of what you cannot control. It grows every time you speak His word instead of rehearsing your worries. It grows each time you surrender your timeline, your assumptions, and your anxieties into His hands. And as it grows, so does your ability to walk through life with a spirit that is steady, anchored, peaceful, and attuned to the movements of God. When you cultivate expectation, you align your spirit with the rhythm of heaven. You create room for God to surprise you, to exceed what you imagined, to reveal His faithfulness in ways that humble and uplift you. You begin to realize that expectancy is not simply a mindset, it is a posture of worship, a way of honoring God by believing that He will be exactly who He has always been. It is trusting that you are not walking into this day alone, that you are carried, covered, guided, strengthened, and supported by a God whose presence does not falter, whose intentions do not waver, and whose love does not fail. Recognizing God as the ultimate source of strength and wisdom is a posture that reshapes the way you encounter every moment of your day. It pulls you out of the illusion that your life must be sustained by your own power, your own understanding, or your own ability to predict outcomes. It invites you into a deeper awareness that everything you need to navigate the complexities of life is rooted in who God is, not in what you can orchestrate. When you begin the day acknowledging him as your source, you anchor yourself in a truth that steadies you, calms you, and strengthens you from within. You move differently because you know you are not relying on limited human insight, but on divine wisdom that sees beyond what your eyes can perceive. You carry your responsibilities differently because you trust that your strength is not measured by how much you can endure on your own, but by how much you allow God to empower you. This recognition frees you from the pressure to have all the answers and instead positions you to receive direction from the one who already knows the path before you. There is a quiet power that enters your spirit when you stop striving from your own strength and begin receiving from God's. It changes the posture of your heart. Instead of waking up weighed down by the demands of the day, you enter the morning with an openness to be poured into. You understand that your strength is not something you must force, it is something God imparts. When you invite him into the deepest places of your thoughts, your emotions, your expectations, and your uncertainties, you allow his presence to carry what was never meant to sit on your shoulders. Recognizing him as your source helps you release the burdens that drain your energy and the battles that were never yours to fight. You begin to trust that he equips you for every task, conversation, decision, and challenge. This trust allows you to breathe more deeply, think more clearly, and move more peacefully because you know the weight of your day is not held up by your own limited capacity. When God becomes your source, your decisions are no longer guided by fear, pressure, or guesswork, but by divine insight. Wisdom flows into your spirit in ways that override confusion and calm the inner chatter that tries to push you into impulsive choices. You begin to discern the difference between what feels urgent and what is truly important. You sense when to wait, when to move, when to speak, and when to stay silent. God's wisdom helps you interpret situations with clarity, seeing beyond what is immediately visible. It stops you from internalizing other people's expectations and instead anchors you in God's direction. This wisdom is not loud or forceful. It is steady, gentle, and deeply rooted in truth. It doesn't rush you. It aligns you. It doesn't overwhelm you, it guides you. And when you recognize that this wisdom is available to you continually, you stop navigating life from a place of uncertainty and begin moving with a confidence that is built on divine understanding. Recognizing God as your ultimate source also transforms the way you handle difficulty. Challenges no longer feel like signs of failure or proof that you are unprepared. Instead, they become moments where God's strength rises within you. You learn to lean into his presence rather than collapsing under pressure. You stop panicking when things don't go according to your plans because you trust that God's plan is intact, even when yours is disrupted. His strength becomes your endurance, enabling you to remain steady when circumstances shift. His wisdom becomes your clarity, helping you navigate obstacles with grace instead of frustration. You no longer crumble under the weight of trials because you know you are held, supported, and empowered by a strength that does not weaken and a wisdom that does not falter. You begin to see adversity not as something that breaks you, but as something that reveals how deeply God sustains you. This recognition also reshapes your internal narrative. Instead of rehearsing thoughts that question your worth, your ability, or your direction, you begin to rehearse the truth that God is your source. You stop speaking from insecurity and start speaking from alignment with his word. You stop expecting yourself to perform perfectly and start trusting the one who equips you. God becomes your confidence, not because you believe in your own perfection, but because you trust his perfection working through you. You become less concerned about how others perceive you and more anchored in how God strengthens and guides you. This shift liberates you from the pressure of comparison, the anxiety of inadequacy, and the trap of self-reliance. You begin to walk in a quiet assurance that you are supplied, supported, and empowered by a source that cannot run out. When you recognize God as your source, your pace changes. You no longer rush through life trying to keep up with demands that drain you. You begin to operate from a place of rest, even in seasons of responsibility. You approach challenges with a sense of groundedness rather than panic. You make decisions calmly because you trust that divine wisdom is available to you. You navigate relationships with more grace because you're not reacting from frustration, but responding from a heart aligned with God's presence. Peace becomes your atmosphere because you understand that everything you need flows from Him, not from external circumstances or human validation. This peace protects your mind from spiraling into worry and shields your heart from becoming overwhelmed by uncertainty. It reminds you that God is your provider, your guide, your sustainer, and your strength. Recognizing God as your source also deepens your gratitude. You begin to notice the subtle ways He provides, guides, and strengthens you throughout the day. You see His hand in moments you might have once overlooked. The clarity that comes in a quiet moment, the encouragement that arrives through an unexpected word, the solution that forms in your mind after prayer, the peace that settles in your heart after you release a worry. Gratitude expands your awareness of God's presence and helps you receive even more from Him. It opens your heart to see that nothing you accomplish is done alone. Every step forward is supported by His strength, and every moment of clarity is infused with His wisdom. This gratitude becomes a continual acknowledgement that God is with you, working through you and supplying you with exactly what you need for each moment. As this recognition grows within you, so does your spiritual maturity. You stop measuring